Okay, so we're just going to do the test review. Going over those self-test questions should help with the review. Can a trigger be defined on more than one table? Yes or no?
No.
No. So per our self-test, triggers can only be defined on one table. Can you invoke a trigger using a call statement? And that would be no. Just remember, call statements are for running your procedures and functions on some vendor databases. A trigger can only be called basically or executed if you're doing an insert, update, or delete. So anything else is not going to invoke a trigger. You actually have to do insert, update, or delete on the table or view for the trigger to be invoked. So you can't call it manually by itself. Do database vendors supply the database with some predefined functions? And well, yes, of course they do. We've used quite a few predefined functions that are built in. Some of them are math functions like minimum, maximum, sum, current timestamp, things like that are functions that run. So yes, vendors do supply functions into the database. So you may not have to write your own functions, see if the vendor's already included something for you. What are all the ways to invoke a trigger? I just said it.
Insert or delete tables.
Inserting rows into a table, deleting rows from a table, and what's the last one?
Update.
Updating data in a table. And what were this is a question you've had out of the self-test. What are the keywords to define when to define whether a trigger is going to fire off before, after, or in place of? What are those keywords? Well, before, after, and instead of is the keyword. So don't get confused if the question is wording it in place of. It's actual keywords instead of. It's kind of hard to have in the acronyms that are synonyms that before or after. Beginning, end, I guess we could. Beginning and end is still not really, because it's before. Beginning and end don't really describe that. So just remember those keywords: before, after, and instead of. instead of triggers can only be created on what? Views. This is out of a previous chapter. What are the two types of invoke routines the SQL supports? Remember chapter 14? What did we cover in chapter 14? Postgres only supported one type up until the later versions like 12 and 13, but what were the two things we played with in chapter 14? Functions and procedures, yes. So invoke routines are either a function that you create or stored procedure. Both of those are defined in the SQL standard. Stored procedures and functions, but like I said, when the version of Postgres we were using only allowed us to do functions. How many values can a function return? Remember how many return statements we, or not returns, but how many statements that we had the word return in our function? Maybe our Python engineer back here knows how many values a function can return. One. Yeah, function is only return one value or return one thing. Now, it could be an array of something, it could return a table or something like that, but it's just one. You're not returning more than one thing out of a function. This is also sort of in our, it was in our review questions here at the back of the book. Specifically number 14. Part of the answer. Insert references what type of data? An insert trigger references what type of data? New data. A delete trigger references what type of data? Old. Correct. Update triggers reference what type of data? Both new and old, yes. Because you're updating a value. The updated value is new and the value that was in the database that you're updating is an old value. Okay, so we have some homework for you to do. We changed the due date, so you may have to go to week 14 to find the link to it, to turn in your questions for chapter 15, and then also do the chapter 15 homework. It's creating a trigger or two, and I give you some test statements to run to verify that you wrote the function and trigger correctly and applied it correctly into the Chinook database. So go ahead and work on the chapter 15 homework.